Mo, it's Gary Vaynerchuk, and you're on the Ask GaryVee show with Michael Ventura.
Hey.
Oh my goodness, this is amazing. Thank you so much for taking my call. I appreciate it.
No worries, Mo. What's your question?
So my question is there ever a point where you can be too empathetic as a business that it's detrimental?
Michael?
Yeah, I would say that, there comes a point where you can't take every piece of information from every single person. At a certain point, you have to draw the line and say, we've got enough to make a decision. Let's move on. You can't boil the ocean. And so I think that that's a tendency, particularly of a lot of startups. When startups get started, obviously there's like a small team. Every decision's being made as a committee and you're kind of working together to grow. But
it's interesting you said that. I apologize for cutting you off. I would argue that one of the reasons I like a lot of startups is there is usually a founder or a force where she's just being the dictator, and that big companies get into committee thinking and get really slow. But to your point, I've seen both.
Yeah, I guess it could happen either way, right? But I think what happens is when something scales super fast, right? When you go from a culture of 10 where you kind of feel like you've been included, and then all of a sudden you're a culture of 1,000, and like now you used to care, you used to have a seat at the table, and now you don't. That's when things also can the wheels can fall off the bus a little bit. So yeah, I think there does come a point that you have enough information that you can make the decision, and beyond that, it starts to become a little tedious.
Mo, to answer your question from my perspective, I do think that both companies I've built day in and day out, Wine Library and VaynerMedia, that I was too empathetic, which then led to entitlement. I have absolutely, no question, run two organizations that I established too much entitlement, and then both, and I'm in the process towards the tail end here at VaynerMedia. We started it last March, so about a year and maybe 14 months into this, where it was painful and it led with things like, firing a lot of people and things like that. I still believe in this, by the way, in the next business I build from scratch or jump into, or probably when I buy a brand and run it, I'll do the same thing. I'm a believer of establishing warm and emotional and lovey and good, warm, awesome vibes. But no question, I'm always aware that come year 5 to 10, I'm going to be dealing with entitlement, and I'm going to have to correct it. And I think I'm more aware of it because of the scale of Vayner compared to Wine Library. And my hope is that I have a better balance of radical candor in the beginning and a couple of other things, because empathy is unbelievable. I can't wait for Michael to jump on this. I'm dying to get his perspective. Empathy is unbelievable. I do think, like anything, much like the Force, everything has to be in balance. It can go too far, and you get into delusion and complacency and entitlement, and then you get into a scary place.
Absolutely. You also, if you think about it, so many people misconstrue empathy for the wrong things. Like, really, empathy is just about understanding. And when people think about empathy as being nice or being sympathetic, those are not the same thing. They're not synonymous at all, right? Actually, you can be like, some of the best sociopaths in the world are also the best empaths, because they know it's going to get under your skin. They know you, they understand you, and so they're going to use that to their advantage. Now, that's not what we're necessarily trying to create more of in the world, but at the same time, it is like there comes a point that too much is too much.
Well, and so that brings a great point, because you just mentioned being an empath. I understand that me as a person, I'm an empath. And so that's one of the challenges that I face, and I realize that, being too empathetic with my clients. Like, oh, yes, I understand your financial situation. Oh, yes, I can help out.
So I would say what Michael's saying is very right. You're mixing empathy into other characteristics.
Agree. Yeah,
right?
I would say you stop at understanding it. Don't put yourself into a place where you have to solve it from their shoes. Understand their perspective, but they're paying you to solve it from your shoes.
But also, don't blend things that are actually strengths or strategies into woe is me. Let me explain. I have in the past had this populate in my mind, and I corrected myself. I've never let it gain a lot of momentum, but I see a ton of startups that I advise start crying about that. I'm too empathetic for my, and I'm saying, no, you're a little bit more clever than that. And maybe you are too, Mo. Maybe you're doing that because you realize that's your competitive advantage. You're competing against people who don't have the ability, or too big, or pander to Wall Street, where money is their North Star. I was overly empathetic to my clients to the tune of, wait a minute, VaynerMedia is now a threat. So you've got to understand the line between being strategic about building leverage versus being a pushover. Does that make sense, Mo?
Totally makes sense.
And I think you have to understand, for example, I don't make a lot of profit, right? And so, some may say that I'm being too empathetic to my client. I'm thinking I'm building leverage for building a huge book of business. It's harder to fire agencies when they bring you value. And then over time, I can build out the value. Plus, I'm building it for a very different reason, blah, 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 blah. So, you have to also know what you're being driven by, right? Like, some people want a lot of employees. Some people want to say they do 100 million in revenue, but only 1 million in profit. Others want to do 5 million in profit with 5 million in revenue with 4 million in profit, because they're at a point in their life where they want to buy a home or a second home or a vacation home or a Maserati. So, Mo, I think be very careful here. So for example, I love being taken advantage of because I find it to be my strength and my leverage. So you have to figure out if you're only looking at one part, which is a purchase order, an invoice, and the financial part. If it makes you happy for over delivering, but you make 500,000 in profit less on $1 million overall, so you're leaving half the money. Yes, your grandfather who was an accountant may think you're an idiot, but what fills your heart and soul might be something different.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.